In 1996, a Utah ranch was purchased by a billionaire aerospace entrepreneur, not because it was a good investment, because something on that property had already driven the previous family off after 2 decades of absolute terror. Cattle mutilations, poltergeist activity, objects appearing and disappearing, and something large, something that couldn't be identified, prowling the perimeter at night. The new owner didn't buy it to live there. He bought it to study. And what his team documented over the following years was strange enough that it eventually landed on the desk of the United States government. The FBI visited Skinwalker Ranch. Officially, that visit never happened. I'm Kenji Yams. This is the After Dark File, and tonight we're opening the file they don't want you to find. There is a 512-acre ranch in the Uinta Basin of northeastern Utah. No military installation, no government research facility, just cattle pasture, a farmhouse, and about 40 miles of nothing in every direction. And yet, between 1994 and at least 2019, the United States government, in various forms, wearing various hats, visited, monitored, and in some cases, flat out surveilled that property. Some of those visits are documented, some are rumored, and some are buried in files that the Freedom of Information Act requests keep coming back empty on. This is the story of Skinwalker Ranch. Not the History Channel version, the version with actual names on actual paper. The Uinta Basin sits at roughly 4,700 feet elevation. It is cold in the winter and brutally hot in the summer. The nearest city of any real size is Vernal, Utah. Population around 10,000. Salt Lake City is about 150 miles southwest. The basin itself has been home to the Uinta and Ouray Ute tribe for centuries. They had a name for what lived in that land: Skinwalker, a shape-shifting figure from Navajo tradition. But the Ute people had their own understanding of it, their own warnings, and for generations, they simply did not go near that property that would eventually become known as Skinwalker Ranch. That detail alone should probably stop us in our tracks. It didn't stop the Shermans. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the property, then called it the Henderson Ranch, for $200,000. Terry was a cattle rancher. He was a practical man, not a UFO guy, not a Bigfoot guy, just a guy who needed land and found some at a price he could afford. Within days of moving in, the family reported seeing a wolf, an enormous one, larger than any natural species, walking calmly onto their property. Terry said it was friendly at first. He let him pet it. Then it grabbed one of his calves by the snout. He shot it. He shot it multiple times, point blank, with his rifle. The wolf looked at him, shook the bullets off, and walked away. That was day 2. Over the next 18 months, the Shermans documented cattle mutilation with surgical precision incisions and no blood at the scene. 3 dogs that vanished in a single night. 1 found as a scorch mark in the field. Strange lights moving over the property at speeds no aircraft should manage. And voices, disembodied, in a language none of them recognize. Terry Sherman told the Salt Lake City Desert News, and this is a direct quote from the August 1996 article by journalist Zach Van Neek. Quote, he said, "I know what I saw. I know it wasn't any kind of conventional aircraft." The article ran and got attention, and within weeks of publication, 2 men showed up at the ranch. They said they were scientists. In 1996, Las Vegas real estate billionaire Robert Bigelow purchased the property for $200,000, the same price that the Shermans paid. He funded an organization called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, N-I-D-S. It was staffed with former military intelligence officers, PhD physics, and veterinary pathologists. Not exactly the group you assembled to study fence posts. NIDS deployed a full-time on-site research team. They installed cameras, motion sensors, electromagnetic monitoring equipment. They documented cattle mutilations with tissue samples. They recorded over 100 anomalous events in the first 2 years alone. Here is what they did not do: release most of those findings to the public. Colm Kelleher, a biochemist who served as NIDS deputy administrator, did eventually write a book in 2005 called Hunt for the Skinwalker. In it, he describes an event on March 12, 1997. 2 researchers watching a pasture at approximately 2 a.m. observed a luminous orange object, roughly the size of a basketball. It was hovering 12 feet off the ground. One researcher approached. The object accelerated and vanished. He described the air where it had been as smelling like sulfur. Now here is where the story pivots. Because NIDS wasn't operating in a vacuum, in 2007, a New York Times investigation revealed that Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, at the time the Senate Majority Leader, had quietly secured $22 million in Department of Defense funding for a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP. That program partially focused its research on Skinwalker Ranch. The director of AATIP was a man named Luis Elizondo, a former Army counterintelligence officer. He has since gone on record slating that the program's findings were, quote, compelling evidence we may not be alone. Robert Bigelow's aerospace company, Bigelow's Aerospace Advanced Space Studios, BAASS, was awarded the primary contract to conduct that research. Bigelow had literally sold the ranch to himself as a research subject funded by the Pentagon. Let that land. Multiple FOIA requests have been filed attempting to access the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. Reports generated from that research. The responses have been consistent. Either the documents don't exist, which contradicts testimony from people who wrote them, or they're classified on national security grounds. Dr. James Lakatsky, a former DIA physicist who visited the ranch in 2008, co-authored a book in 2021 called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. He describes observing, on a single visit, an object materialized inside a locked room. He filed a report. That report is not publicly available. Lakatsky does not strike anyone who has read his work as a man with something to sell you. He writes like an engineer describing a malfunction, dry, precise, and deeply uncomfortable. So what is it? Theory 1. A naturally occurring geomagnetic anomaly. The Uinta Basin sits atop unusual geological formations. Some researchers suggest the basin generates electromagnetic fields that can cause hallucinations, an equipment malfunction, and psychological disturbances. That doesn't explain the cattle. Theory 2. Government testing. Black budget aircraft. Psychological operations on civilians to gauge response to unexplained phenomena. That doesn't explain why the government keeps researching it instead of explaining it. So, Theory 3. And this is the one that Ute elders offered before any of this even started. The land is a portal, a threshold. Whatever comes through, it doesn't follow the physics we were taught. For what it's worth, physicists who studied the property described detecting what they could only call a magnetic anomaly that should not exist at that latitude. They wrote that in a report. The report is classified. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night about this case. The Shermans left the ranch within 2 years of buying it. They refused to speak publicly for decades. Gwen Sherman gave one interview, and described her children waking up screaming every night without being able to say why. But Terry Sherman, in that original 1996 newspaper article, said something that nobody seems to quote. He said the strangest part was, it wasn't the lights or the wolves or the voices. He said the strangest part was that feeling that something was watching them. Not from the outside, but from the inside of the house. And he said that feeling started that same night they signed the deed. Before they ever set foot on that property. Now, if you made it this far, you already know this story isn't over. Like, the files are still sealed. The research is still going on. And somewhere in Uinta Basin tonight, there are cameras rolling on an empty field, waiting, watching for something. Here is what I keep coming back to with this story. The government doesn't investigate things it doesn't believe in. The Pentagon doesn't fund research programs for phenomena it considered impossible. The FBI doesn't send agents to ranches in rural Utah because of local folklore. And yet, AATIP existed. The funding existed. The visits existed. The documentation exists. What doesn't exist, at least not publicly, is an explanation for what was documented there: the UAP sightings, the cattle deaths with surgical precisions and no tracks, the objects moving through walls, the feeling reported by almost everyone who spent significant time on that property that something on that land was watching them. Skinwalker Ranch is still active. It still has a research team on site. Whatever is happening there, it hasn't stopped. The Ute tribe has known about this land for generations. They have a name for what lives there. They also have a rule. They don't go near it, and they never have. Thank you for listening. If this one got under your skin, good. Drop a comment below telling me what you think is actually happening on this ranch. I want to know your thoughts. Subscribe to the After Dark file so you never miss when we open the next one. We'll see you in the dark.